This is page 212. Your turn. Write each fraction as a decimal and as a percent. So remember back to the previous page. If the denominator is a factor or a multiple of 100, like 25 is, it's really simple. Check this out. On this one, you simply multiply 25 by 4, and what do you get? You get 100. I'm going to actually redo this right on a whiteboard. If the denominator is a factor or a multiple of 100, in this case you would multiply it by 4 because you'd get 100 as your denominator. And the word percent here means out of 100, so we've accomplished our goal. Whatever you do to the second term, you have to do to the first term, so it's going to be 9 times 4 is 36. The answer is 36 hundredths. I was asked to do two things. I was asked to write it as a decimal, and the 36 over 100 means 36 in the hundredths place as a decimal, and as a percent, it's 36%. Super easy. Number 9 is much harder because on number 9, 8 is not a factor or a multiple of 100, so we use long division, where we divide our numerator by our denominator. Once again, this doesn't look right, so we actually annex a decimal and some zeros, and we do long division. 8 does not go into 7, but it does go into 70 8 times, because 8 times 8 is 64. 70 minus 64 is 6. Bring down this 0. 8 goes into 60 7 times, because 7 times 8 is 56. 60 minus 56 is 4. Annex and drop another 0. 8 goes into 40 5 times. 5 times 8 is 40. Because we get a remainder of 0, we're done. The decimal answer is 0.875 thousandths. I'll remind you now that by converting it to a decimal is we take our decimal here and we move it 2 places to the right past the hundredths place, because percent means out of 100, so we make it to the hundredths place. If I move it 2 to the right, it would be 87.5%. And that should make sense. If you think about, always use your common sense. If you got the score on a quiz right here, 7 out of 8, that's almost full points. 7 out of 8 would be, I don't know, close to a 90%, right? Well, your percent here, 87.5, would represent that accurately. 87.5%. Moving on. Guided practice. Helen spends 12% of her budget on transportation expenses. Write this percent as a fraction and as a decimal. Well, we know that 12% means 12 out of 100. And if we write it as a fraction, that would be 12 100ths. And it doesn't say anything about simplifying, but I simplify every time I can by dividing by a common factor. If I divide these by 2, I would get 6/50ths. And if I divided those by 2, I'd get 3/25ths. And that's our best answer, 3/25ths. And as a decimal, 12 out of 100 would be a 12. I'm going to do an and symbol here. Would be a 12 in the hundredths place, so 0.12. So my answers are 3/25ths and 0.12. All right, moving on. Numbers 2 and 3, actually I'm going to squeeze up and we're going to do now 2 through 5 here. Numbers 2 and 3 say model the decimal, then write percent and fraction equivalent. So it says 0.53, and I want you to notice it's 0.53 in the hundredths. So I'm going to shade in 53 out of the 100. So I'm just going to count. I'm going to make it a little smaller. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 1, 2, 3. And so I have to write that as a percent and as a fraction. Well, as a percent, it's going to be 53%. And as a fraction, it's going to be 53 hundredths, and that doesn't simplify because 53 and 100 don't share a factor. 1.07, that means I need to shade the entire thing. And that's going to be 100. And then we've got 7 over, so it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now what is that as a percent? Well, over here I didn't shade the whole thing, so it was under 100%. Over here I shaded more than 1, which means it's over 100%. It's actually 107%. And as a fraction, it's going to be 1 whole with 7 left out of 100. It's going to be 1 7/100. All right, moving on. Numbers 4 and 5. It says write each fraction as a decimal and as a percent. I need to show some work here, so I'm actually going to move this up and make myself a whiteboard. And yet again, we face these types of problems where if the denominator is compatible with 100, like 7/20, it's really simple. And if the denominator on the next one is not compatible with 100, it's complicated. So my goal here, the directions say to write it as a decimal and as a percent. Percent means out of 100, so I'm going to write my equals, and I'm going to write it out of 100. Where am I getting that 100 from? Because the directions ask me to write it as a percent. And then I go back to my math skill and I ask myself, how does 20 become 100? Well, I multiply by 5. And if you multiply this term also by 5, you get 35. So I'm going to get 35%. That's my second answer. My first answer is 35 out of 100 is, I'm going to write it up here. It's a 35 in the hundredths place, and it's 35%. And then the next one is more complicated because 3 out of 8 does not go into 100. That method's not going to work because 8 doesn't go into 100 evenly. So this will be the third time I've shown you that if, and this is the third time, it's all been eighths too. We did 1/8, we did 7/8, now we're doing 3/8. So it's going to be long division where we go 3 divided by 8. 8 does not go into 3, so I annex a 0. 8 goes into 30 3 times. 3 times 8 is 24. Subtract and get 6. 8 goes into 67 times because 8 times 7 is 56. And 8 goes into 40 5 times. 5 times 8 is 40. And so the decimal is 0.375. And as a fraction, it's going to be, move my decimal 2 places to the right, past the hundredths place, it's going to make it 37.5%. Okay, we've done 3 problems now that are eighths, so I expect you to know how to do those. Number 6 says, how does the definition of percent help you to write fraction and decimal equivalents? Well, percent means, I'm going to type, since percent means out of 100, it reminds us to convert the second term to 100 by either multiplying or dividing, or using long division. Now, what does all that mean that I just typed? Well, what it means for like number 4, if I'm thinking about number 4, when I had number 4, when it looked like this, I should have thought to myself, well, I want to make 20 turn into 100, so I'm going to multiply by 5. And on number 5, I thought to myself, well, I can't multiply 8 or divide 8 to become 100, so instead of doing that, I'm going to do long division. So the definition of percent, meaning out of 100, is a clue of what we need to do, which is change the denominator to 100. Okay, good job. You're done with page 212.